Healthcare is changing, and Dr. Nancy RN is here for you. The topics are many, but each program stands on its own with 3 key action points for you to learn. Your guide to a healthier you in a changing world. Dr. Nancy RN.
Welcome to Dr. Nancy RN, Healthy World, Healthy Nation, Healthy You. I'm Nancy Valentine, PhD and registered nurse, and this show is dedicated to you, the healthcare consumer. And our topic today is another part of a series on autism spectrum disorder. And we have a returning guest, a psychotherapist, Dr. Robert Nassif. And he is going to be talking with us today about a program entitled Building the Family Circle with an Autistic Child, keeping the whole family in focus and taking care of everyone's needs. Now that's a tall order, but this is not a show on prescriptions. This is a show on dialogue about how an interpersonal set of circumstances and what happens interpersonally within a family as it is growing with an autistic child in the middle of it. We're going to be talking about the tips and what everybody has to do in order to get their needs met as well. So I want to welcome you back, Robert, for our 3rd show in your series, and it's been delightful. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, I want to tell you something about Robert. He has a phenomenal background because he is the father of an autistic child. And in our earlier series, he talked about a whole show on just understanding that the reality of having an autistic child really was something that he and his family had to deal with. But it was very difficult, and he talks about that. In our 2nd show, we talked about what it's like as a parent. You know, what do you do as a parent to really make a difference and really help your child? Now we're taking it that next step, and the next step is really to look at the larger family system. And I think you're going to find this very illuminating, not only if you have a child with autism, of course, but you will know somebody, no doubt, that has a child with autism. It could be a family member, a friend, a neighbor. There are much more prevalence than people were aware of, particularly in the past. And therefore, with this more understanding of what's out there, we all need to really understand this and have some skills so we can be part of the community and really help other people. Now, let me tell you about Robert Nassif. He is a seasoned professional psychologist with 25 years of experience in an independent practice entitled Alternative Choices in Philadelphia. He is really an expert in working with families with children with autism and other special needs. He works a lot with the psychology of men and fatherhood, particularly with this issue. He's also the author of a book in 2013, Autism in the Family, coping with Caring and Coping Together, which is really important and a great subtitle. So let me just read a couple things that people have said about this book. Shannon Nichols, owner and director of Aspire Center for Learning and Development and author of Girls Grow Up on the Autism Spectrum, says, quote, "Every family who receives a diagnosis of autism for their child should be given this book with a hot cup of tea and a warm blanket." So it's very comforting, obviously, to read from his experiences. The second person, who is Paula Cluth, PhD, author of You're Going to Love This Kid, Teaching Students with Autism in the Inclusive Classroom, very positive work that she's doing, says, quote, "I literally laughed and cried. This is one of the most honest books I have ever read on the subject. It is direct, warm, compelling, and ever so helpful." So I think you're going to find our discussion today helpful as well. And Robert, I know that you often talk from your own experience, and then you move to the people that you're working with in your practice. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you had to do to really change your family in a positive way, dealing with your son who has autism.
Well, the biggest thing was learning to be able to talk about it, to be able to talk about things that I couldn't fix or change, and to begin to just be there and do the best I could. It's natural to want this to go away. At the time my son was born, I was teaching in a literacy program and helping people who had dropped out of school to get their GEDs. And boy, I thought I could teach anybody to read. So I thought I could teach my son to talk and read. And I wasn't able to make a dent in his communication skills. And that forced me to acknowledge my powerlessness and to have to look inside myself in a way that I hadn't previously in life. And that was no easy thing. Autism's a gritty reality for parents, and for men it's gritty because it's hard for us to put words to these things. We want to jump into, we're action-oriented, and it's not that women don't want to fix this, and it's not that women don't want to take action, but we're action-oriented, and when we can't take action, we're like speechless. And that's the thing I had to learn.
I see. Well, that must have been a tough step in the process.
It's tough, but it's a step that men need to take in their lives, whether they have a kid with special needs or not.
We could do a whole show on that as well.
Oh, we could. Wanting to fix things is a good part of our masculinity, but without that skill of listening, it's hard to know where to put your energy and how to do it effectively. So I think this is an important step for men and for relationships in general.
Right.
You know, it just comes up in a certain way when you have a child who's different.
Right. Well, we said in this show that we were going to cover 3 areas of interest. We were going to talk about how to take time for dealing with everything that is now a necessity in order to take care of a child with special needs. Then we were going to talk also about what do your other children need? You know, how are their needs being met? And to be sure to reinforce everything they are doing right and explain autism at the level of the other children. Then we were going to talk about the difference in perspective of the moms and dads, which is what you were starting to allude to, that as parents, we have different perspectives, whether you're the mother or the father. So again, all these are the component parts of a family system, as all families have to function together. So in terms of the appreciation, how do you really begin that process? I mean, it must be very confusing to other children, depending on their age, of course, but say a child is not the firstborn, or if the child is firstborn and there are other children coming along, how do you help people deal with that?
Well, let's take a step back for a minute. There's many kinds of families. In a sense, diversity is the new normal.
Right.
So we have, besides traditional families, we have step families, adoptive families, same-sex families, many kinds of families. When a couple has a child or adopts a child, what is generally true is that 60 to 70% of them have stress and distress in their relationship, taking on that responsibility, having less time for each other. That's a universal challenge of couples.
Right.
So then introduce a child with special needs, such as autism. They suck up all the attention, and they need it. This is not unusual.
Right.
So it becomes almost like a sinkhole, and everything goes in there, and you take each other for granted. And that exacerbates the stress and the depression and the anxiety, which appears higher in women than men, but men are less open in admitting their symptoms and less open in asking for help. So it takes a big toll on the couple.
Well, I mean, how do people manage that? Because you just said the reality is that these children do take so much more time. So how do people balance that? I mean, are they capable of balancing it?
Well, I think we're capable of it, but we have trouble giving ourselves permission to do it.
Say more about that. That's interesting.
So particularly for moms, I think there's more of an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the child's happiness and development. The father or the primary wage earner, which could be the mother sometimes, and not the father, but the primary wage earner is able to focus on that and and that sometimes detracts from the relationships. But for the primary caregiver, there's a lot of guilt that goes with questioning the responsibility for the child. However, our children, whether they're typically developing or developing with special needs, they need happy, energetic parents. The mental health of parents affects the children. And so this is one way I approach it with parents. I don't think it works to say to a stressed out mom, take time for yourself, go to the gym. Like, she just hears that as like one more thing I'm not doing right.
Right.
So,
or when am I going to find,
yeah, how am I going to do that?
Right.
And then you're telling me I'm not doing that right. What I think works is just finding ways to take little breaks, to catch your breath. Now, it turns out, in my experience and in the literature, men are a lot better at taking breaks.
Are they?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't want to touch that one.
I hate to admit it, but it's true. It's true in my house. So,
why do you think they're wired that way? They're just able to shut down and just block all the other stuff out?
Sort of. Again, I hate admitting this, but there's a certain element of truth in it.
But I guess, I mean, we may say, okay, we could throw stones at that reality, or we could say maybe they're just better at coping under that kind of stress. That's a coping mechanism.
Sure. But what fathers learn is, just by being a father, is to become a less selfish person. I don't think, and being a mother transforms a woman, but what fathers tell me is, this is the most unselfish thing they ever did, was parent a child. Because men are more used to thinking about themselves, more used to competition and goals and winning. Girls and females and women are more seasoned in relating and caretaking. So there's a different kind of transformation, but that first child in particular, the woman becomes a mother and the man becomes a father, and then you have a family. And that really shuffles the deck on everything.
Interesting, right. So when that is a challenge in any relationship, how do you think this even adds more stress? I mean, obviously you said it's a sinkhole of activity. There's so much that has to be done. There are all the overlay of the emotions, women feeling very guilty or just almost possessed with this desire to make their child happy no matter what, because they see that the child is disadvantaged socially, and they don't know what's going on in the child's mind because they can't really express it verbally in many cases. So they try to read all the different signs and try to really go in and fill that void. Whether it can or cannot be done, they still want to do that. The fathers also have their own set of emotions. So how do people in that interpersonal dynamic, how do they get over this? Or can they get over it? Like you said, they can, but how?
So I think the important thing, and the way to get over it, is to notice and appreciate out loud what your partner's doing. So we're consumed by the challenge. The mom, in the way you're describing, the dad may be working harder, making money to pay the bills, and everybody trying to help the child. And we start taking each other for granted. So often the man starts feeling left out, uncared for, and just feels excluded, you know. But what I say to fathers is, this is like the mother lion with her cub. Do you want somebody else to be the mother of your kid? Really? Do you? And they go, no, this is good, she's great. And I was like, you should tell her that.
Right, so saying it out loud. I think that's a good piece of advice for all couples, to say things that are appreciative out loud. But again, we're hearing in these cases, it's really pivotal, it's critical, and it can be life-saving for their relationship.
Absolutely. So just, you might not be able to have date night. This is what couples therapists routinely recommend. You might not be able to get a babysitter who could take care of your kid, but everybody can take a little time to appreciate what their partner's doing that day.
Right.
And people feel good about this, and it brings them together. And then you look for ways to sort of steal time to be together, whether that's just for a cup of tea or coffee, or sometimes you can get a night out, or just a few minutes at the end of the day to talk about something other than your child, something other than autism. We need breaks from that.
Right.
And we could take them together, you know, because early on, the conversations about this consume an average couple.
Right.
They're totally consuming, and that's natural. But we sort of have to get beyond that, take care of each other a little bit, because our child needs us to do that over the long term.
Right.
And that makes sense to people.
Right. But I think what you're also reminding us about is that this child, even if that child cannot communicate in regular ways, is very aware and very sensitive, and maybe even ultra sensitive to the interpersonal and emotional climate of the household.
Right, and there's research now that is beginning to look into, you know, exactly that the positive climate in the household promotes the healthiest possible development in the children.
Right, right.
So all of this affects children. How a couple gets along affects children, whether they're typically developing or whether there's a special child in the family.
Right, but probably even more so, because you don't get the feedback as a parent maybe as directly from the child with special needs. So in terms of frequency, how do you talk to your clients as far as acknowledging each other's worth or taking that little time away? Do you say, you know, daily? What's the frequency?
As much as possible.
Yeah.
Could be several times a day. But what I'll do in a typical counseling session is ask them to appreciate each other right there.
Right.
Like, what's she doing great lately? What's he doing great lately? Tell me more. Tell me some more.
Right.
What else? What else?
Right.
And that even establishes a positive atmosphere in which to then do some problem solving around things that are unsolved.
Right.
And so when we are sort of giving out stars, so to speak, it becomes easier to work at correcting problems.
Right.
Most people are doing a lot right, and my own belief is that most people, including children with autism, are doing their best in the moment. Not that we can't do better, but we're doing the best we can in difficult situations. If we want to do better, appreciating what we're doing right is going to help us.
Right. So I think the takeaway from this part of our conversation is that really the mom, dad, or as Robert said, there are all kinds of different blended families. Whoever are the primary caretakers, they need to really be their own coaches for one another. So by being positive, coaching each other in a positive rather than negative way really goes a long way for establishing the kind of comfort zone that all children really need. So I think it's good advice overall, but particularly so in this case. Let's move on to the children. What are some of the challenges that you've seen and what you've already dealt with in your own family with how other children respond to this?
Well, there's a variation in this. However, what the typically developing kids generally experience is that their parents aren't as available to them as they would like.
Mm-hmm.
And that parents' attention is sort of unfairly divided, in a sense, because the child with special needs is taken up a lot. So one of my daughters wrote an essay where she called my son Tariq Dad Hogger.
Dad Hogger.
That's right. So when I mention that, people always laugh because it kind of speaks right to the issue that the child with autism can kind of unwittingly hog all the parents' attention with their behavioral challenges and special needs. So again, if we take like a step back and think about raising children, it's really impossible to give equal attention to each child.
Right.
But what is possible, and is possible in families raising kids with autism, is to give each child special and unique attention based on their needs. And it won't be equally divided, because that's impossible. But really important to acknowledge all the achievements and the value of our more typically developing kids. And I'll just use that term, more typically developing, and not to take them for granted. When they're taken for granted, there's all kinds of problems that arise. So recently I wrote a blog about a young woman I met in the Midwest, and she told me she used to fake a fever to get her mother's attention. And I said, how do you fake a fever? And she said, I take the thermometer, I run it under warm water, it goes all the way up, and then I shake it down to 102, and then I go to my mom.
Oh my.
And then I can stay home for the day.
And how old was she?
Well, she was doing this when she was 12 and 13. She's talking to me in her early 20s at a conference, and she was there with her mom.
Okay.
So we shared a good laugh, but it wasn't funny at the time
Right.
when she was growing up. And she loves her brother, but the way to get her mother's attention was to fake being sick. So if parents don't acknowledge this, but it can be difficult to acknowledge for an overwhelmed parent, if they don't acknowledge what seems so unfair, then their child may develop other symptoms to get their attention,
Right.
varied symptoms.
Right, right. And it's a good coping mechanism on that other child's part, too. I mean, they're finding some way to do it.
Right, right. It might not be the best way, but they're finding a way to get what they need.
Right.
So we want to provide that route without them having to develop a symptom.
Right.
Because the symptom can start to take a life of its own, and then you're in a different ballpark.
Right. Well, what kind of really concrete tactics can parents use to avoid that kind of acting out behavior? How can they really bring that to the surface more quickly?
I think it's some of the things involve giving your typically developing children information at their level about their brother or sister's condition, explaining that the brain of their brother or sister is different and how it's different and what that means. That can start happening fairly young, and siblings, just like parents, need information at their level to understand, in this case, autism. They also need one-to-one time with their parents. So mom can have a play date with the kid once a week, dad can have a play date with the kid once a week. The typically developing child needs that one-on-one attention. And giving that can make a huge difference.
Right.
And being able to listen to your children's reactions, their feelings, their thoughts, which might be painful to hear, but being able to listen and validate their frustrations, maybe their embarrassment, makes a world of difference.
Right. Can you give us an example of the kinds of things typically that a sibling might say about their brother or sister?
They might say, he takes up the whole house, meaning wherever they go, they're being followed. Wherever they go, they're being disrupted. I want to have my friends over, but I don't want him around. Why? He might be disruptive, he might be embarrassing. I just want to be alone with my friends. I want to be alone with you, Mom. I want to be alone with you, Dad. I want to go on vacation without him. And that's a really tough one.
Right.
So things like that, where that frustration level has built up, even a child with, and this is a different slant, a child with Asperger's or high-functioning autism, so to speak, may think it's unfair that they have behavior charts to modify their behavior, and their brother or sister doesn't. Well, their brother or sister might not need a behavior chart, but they also see it as unfair that, well, you're giving me stars and X's, and you're not giving it to him. So there's a lot of sibling rivalry in this respect, but it's also a normal part of human development.
Right.
It's normal, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's really gritty.
Right. But how do you think parents should handle that? Like, I think that is a very good example of when kids are getting to be pre-adolescent. They want their friends over, and they say, I don't want him around or her around. What should a parent do?
I think we have to respect that and provide opportunities for privacy, for different kinds of interactions. So you can plan some activities that are for the whole family and some that are, for parts of the family.
Right.
But it's that flexibility, it's that willingness, it's that to take each child's needs into account, each individual's needs into account. When people get stuck with, we're family, we have to do it together, there's often a lot of stress and conflict in that. We don't have to do everything together, but look for the things that are enjoyable to do together, and then look for ways that each person can have enjoyment.
Right, right. So again, it's like really the same advice you're giving to each other as couples, is really to say a lot of this out loud, to really be able to reinforce the positive of each child, no matter which child it is, and then to really keep open communication, which really takes a lot of work.
Oh yeah, this isn't easy.
Right.
You know, it isn't easy to talk about these things, but when we talk about them, the problems, in my experience, can be diminished. And when we hold it in, it doesn't get better. It's sort of being able to talk about it, look into it. When we look into it, we can find some of the coping strategies and improve the situation, or learn to live with the situation. When we don't talk about it and don't look into it, the pressure builds up and it doesn't go away.
Right.
It's like Groundhog Day. These problems keep coming at you every day.
Right.
Question is, can you learn to relate to the problems in a constructive, productive way?
Right.
And I think we can.
Right. But it always seems like the theme is always how to be best in class for coping. You know, these are like coping strategies. I think in closing, can you give us any story about a family that really came through this where it made the family even stronger? Something.
Oh, I think there's so many stories like that really speak to how resilient families are, to how families bounce back and learn from their experience. So one of my favorites is a couple who was really struggling, and the woman had an aunt she was very close to in the Midwest, and her aunt was on hospice, and so she went for 3 days to spend time with her aunt, say goodbye. And her husband was home alone with the kids, including their daughter with autism. And he couldn't go to work one day because the kid had a meltdown. And he just spent 3 days doing what his wife does every day.
So that was a wake-up call.
Oh yeah, when she came back, he was so overwhelmed with gratitude that she came back and understanding of what she does every day. And I hear other stories like this. It's sometimes when the mom goes away for something and the guy learns what everyday life is really like in the household, that he appreciates her and he feels bad about his irritability.
Right.
And they turn a corner. And it doesn't have to be going away for a weekend. Sometimes it's just like taking over for an evening or a day and having that experience. And that and people are transformed by this experience in so many ways.
I think that's very positive. I think they've actually made a couple movies out of that, where the woman goes away for whatever reason, and the father is really like overwhelmed with having to take these day-to-day responsibilities for the kids. And when the woman comes back, it's almost like they have to bring in a whole cleaning service and put the house back together again. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
I want to thank Robert again, Robert Nassif, Dr. Robert Nassif, for being with us. The title of our show, Building the Family Circle with an Autistic Child, Keeping the Whole Family in Focus and Taking Care of Everyone's Needs, is definitely a tall order. But his practical advice, you know, the tactics of how to do this, how to begin those conversations, is really very, very positive. And I think gives hope for people with children with autism, special needs of any type, but a really good, solid advice for any couple. You can really take that away from this discussion as well. It's along a continuum, and those continuums are not black and white. It's really along a whole different spectrum of positive things that people can do to really build their family circle in a very, very good way. Thank you again for being with us, and I want to thank our viewers for being with us as well. This series on autism can be revisited again on the website, and there are a lot of resources there for you as well. So thank you for joining us, and remember, with health, all things are possible. Have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today and that the information will help you in meeting your health goals. Catch this program and other conversations on the website, drnancyrn.com. Or you can write to me as well. I welcome your comments and feedback. Thank you for listening, and join us again. And remember, with health, all things are possible.